Hello and a warm welcome from DD India. I'm Amit Mukherjee and you're watching Connecting the Dots, a show that gets into a deep dive, identifies and connects the dots to get you the big picture of a raging global issue. In this edition, we take a look at how climate change is impacting our lives in more than many ways. As frequent extreme weather conditions and calamities continue to wreak havoc, 90% of the world disasters are now being classified as weather and climate related. And these disasters are taking a toll on the world economy, causing whopping losses to the tune of over $500 billion every year, resulting in 26 million people being pushed into poverty. Now, the world is gearing up for the COP28 conclave in Dubai, scheduled for later this month. One of the key agenda would be to review the midterm status of the 2030 climate change goals. So it's actually the time for the 196 COP member countries to assess the effects of the measures introduced in the 2015 Paris Agreement during COP21. The agreement enlisted ways to limit change of the climate with a target set for 2030, but as far as the climate health of our Earth is concerned, all is not well at all. It's rather very bad. Our planet is warming up and the world is facing unprecedented weather-related impacts. As massive wildfires are being witnessed in many parts, on the other hand, devastating floods are being reported from around the world. Regions known for pleasant weather conditions are now experiencing extreme heat waves that are absolutely unbearable. So the question is, what is the fallout of global warming? How is it changing our environment? Now, these unwanted changes in climate are affecting the availability of water, aggravating water crisis in already water-stressed regions. These are causing droughts, and the possibilities of crop failure are increasing. These ecological droughts are putting many ecosystems at high risks. Even glaciers are melting faster than ever before. The ice caps near the poles and other snow-capped regions of the world are also depleting fast. As a result, sea levels are rising and coastal lands are being engulfed. Climate change has also altered rainfall patterns, increasing the risk of floods, which are a major threat to biodiversity. But even then, the irony is that humans are not doing enough to contain the situation. Now, to add to these woes, there are wars that are being fought, and large-scale destruction of the ecology is happening unchecked, making things even worse. Now, all these things are making the Earth uninhabitable, slowly but surely, a fact which is still not sinking in, and the human minds are still not anticipating what's going to come ahead. The recently published report by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, says the world falls short on financial support for climate action in developing countries. Moreover, the world is not on track to meet the long-term goals on the climate change, those proposed during the Paris Agreement in 2015. The report is a part of the first ever stock-taking exercise scheduled to conclude at the UN Climate Change Conference, or the COP28, this month. The report says financial support for adaptations are inadequate. The funds required to enhance climate resilience globally, particularly in developing countries, are not enough. The developing countries continue to be vulnerable to adverse effects of climate change like floods, droughts, and wildfires. The report also states that the collective progress on mitigation remains inadequate, not enough to meet the targets mentioned in the Paris Agreement. Now, planet Earth has reached the tipping points on several counts in 2019. Atmospheric CO2 or carbon dioxide concentrations reached an annual average of 410 parts per million in 2019, which is higher than at any time in at least 2 million years. Concentrations of methane reached 1,860 parts per billion, highest in the last 800,000 years. Concentrations of nitrous oxide were 332 ppb, also highest in the last 800,000 years. Earth's global average surface temperature between 2011 and 2020 was around 1.1 degrees Celsius, higher than the pre-industrial average. In fact, a key focus of the Paris Agreement, which is trying to address climate change mitigation, adaptation, and finance, is to contain the rise in global temperature also. Now, the goal is to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in the century, and pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. However, in recent years, world leaders have stressed the need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. So, as nearly 200 nations are expected to come together at COP28 to coordinate a global climate action for the future, the first ever report card on climate target progress shows just how far behind we are on our climate targets. So do we need to pull up our socks to save planet Earth? Or even a better question, do we need to act fast to save ourselves from extinction? Well, at least that's what several reports are now pointing at. We need dramatic actions to benefit our climate, and we need them now. COP28 is the world's chance to level up. The COP meets on climate are held in different cities every year to demonstrate the importance of collaboration from nations across the globe. Now, this year's meeting will be held at Dubai in United Arab Emirates. Besides global cooperation to fight climate change, the meet will also take up finance for climate transition and adaptation. This is expected to emerge as a pivotal theme. While calamities like forest fires, floods, quakes continue to wreak havoc in multiple global pockets, reports by experts committees suggest we are completely off track in our mission to save planet Earth. In fact, there is also a lack of will amongst some well-placed countries to help poorer nations to adapt the climate-friendly transitions. And of course, there are wars causing social and ecological destructions, which would take years and huge funds for recovery. Now, sadly, another report by UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, published earlier this year, painted an equally grim picture. This UN climate report gives stark warnings, says the world is on thin ice. The report has reconfirmed that rising temperatures and emissions are an imminent threat to humanity. It urged the world to ramp up efforts to uphold their commitment in the Paris Agreement. The report also said that almost half of the world's population lives in vulnerable regions of the planet, and they will continue experiencing the threat to their ecosystem. Now, sadly, the vulnerable communities that have historically contributed the least to climate change are being affected most adversely. So what's the way forward? Are there enough collaborations happening? But some countries, even developed ones, are revising their goals and targets in the wake of rising inflation and recessionary trends. Now, UK, for instance, has found some of the targets to be burden on its citizens, which is why it has delayed the replacement of home heating systems as well as the transition to diesel and petrol cars. Prime Minister Sunak said he would delay the ban on the sale of new diesel and petrol cars by 5 years and confirmed extending its targets to phase out gas boilers. He also said a worrying set of proposals that has emerged during debates on net zero would be scrapped. Now, these include government interference on how many passengers can travel in a car, to force citizens to have 7 different bins at their homes, to make citizens change diet and harm British farmers by taxing meat, to create new taxes to discourage flying or going on holidays. Now, another important matter which is to come up in the climate meet is the issue of loss and damage fund. The COP27 took a landmark decision to establish a loss and damage fund in Egypt, primarily to help the developing nations. The move was considered to be a vital third pillar in the climate action. Now, this raised hope among developing nations who have been facing the brunt of climate-induced disasters. Developing countries, which contribute the least to global warming and climate change crisis, have had their livelihoods devastated due to uncontrolled use of fossil fuels such as gas, oil, and coal, primarily led by the developed nations. In fact, the wealthiest and rich countries, essentially the global north nations, which account for an overwhelming 79% of all historical carbon emissions until the last decade, owe a considerable debt. But still, the use of loss and damage funds to help the developing nations or the global south countries remain uncertain. Even after several rounds of discussion and deliberations, there is no headway. The ways and means by which developing countries can access this fund for mitigation and climate change adaptations still remain uncertain. Many climate change activists believe the lack of consensus highlights the deep divide between wealthy and developing countries, an issue that required urgent solution in the fight to save the planet. Developing nations want the Loss and Damage Fund to be operated independently under the United Nations, but the rich countries want it hosted by the World Bank. There have been voices amongst environmentalists and civil societies that a constructive engagement by the developed nations or global north countries is needed to resolve this issue. Meanwhile, India has also been proactive in the fight against climate change. While India continues to meet climate goals and net zero targets well in advance, it has been emphasizing on simple and cost-effective ways to help the developing countries meet their goals. In fact, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his address at a joint session at the US Congress in July this year, touched upon India's rapid energy transition to meet its climate goals. PM Modi said that India has achieved its goals of sourcing 40% of installed electric capacity from non-fossil fuel-based resources 9 years ahead of its schedule. In fact, it's worth noting that Indian government's goal is to ensure that renewable supply reaches half of its total energy mix by 2030. Highlighting the importance of participation of masses to achieve sustainability goals, PM Modi mentioned that every individual can make a positive impact. He said, and I quote, "By being mindful in making choices, every individual can make a positive impact. Making sustainability a mass movement will help the world reach the net zero targets faster. Our vision is pro-planet progress. Our vision is pro-planet prosperity. Our vision is pro-planet people," unquote. So as the world continues to walk on thin ice, the world looks forward to the COP28 summit. We hope the world leaders, at least now, would act like superheroes to save planet Earth from reaching a point of no return.